I just want to give you all the time we possibly can muster out of this. Well, good morning. It is 11:15 and a little bit after, so I'm going to start. And as you finish up your visiting or whatever, please come and join us. Never in our wildest imaginations could there have been any anticipation by the Planning Committee that in having this topic this morning would mean so much in terms of having it all work together, that Ahmadzai could be here and welcome us and we could welcome him. So thank you for being here. There will probably be some questions you will want to ask. Jeff is passing out a handout that I hope will give you a little bit of an insight into what we will be doing and hearing today. So if that is of help, thank you. We are going to be very satisfied and informed and blessed by a visit from two of the representatives of our Lighthouse Immigrant Advocacy. Now here in Holland, we know what a lighthouse can mean. It can mean bringing safety for those who are unfamiliar and unsure of the territory. So I'm sure that that had something to do with the name Lighthouse. With advocacy and the immigrant story, that's what we're here to hear from Grace and Sam. Their names are on the sheet, so you have a reference to that, and I'll try to do Grace justice. I would assume it's McConaughey. Close enough? Okay. And Sam, I just learned, is a product of Holland and has lived here and went to Holland Christian and knew Third Church a little bit from the Young Life program. So Jeff, that should perk up your interest. One thing I do have to say, and I will probably be admonished very sincerely and seriously when I just say that we really ought to also recognize the work and the effort and the compassion and the passion of Roger DeYoung. That man has worked so long, so hard, so deeply, and so well to make these stories happen. I hope I'm not doing anything to you. What am I doing to that? So with that, I think that we are very privileged to have Sam and Grace with us, and I'm going to stop talking and let them do the talking. Thank you. Up on the wall, and you just have to tell them when you're ready.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're ready.
There it goes.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Grace, as you could probably guess. I try to figure out where to set this. I am a legal assistant at Lighthouse Immigrant Advocates. I am originally from Peoria, Illinois, so not a product of Holland. However, I just graduated from Hope College this past May. And before that, I was an intern actually at Lighthouse working with Sarah, another attorney in our office, on legal work and also fund development. And then after I graduated, I got a full-time position working as a legal assistant as part of the asylum program.
And my name's Sam Filsick. I'm the asylum attorney at Lighthouse. I went to Hope as well, and yeah, like Peg said, I grew up in Holland, and actually went to Zeeland, and it was. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I actually went to Zeeland, and then was involved as a Young Life leader at Holland Christian for 4 years while I was at Hope. Yeah, and now we're just serving the immigrant community here and helping people to hopefully settle in the United States as they make as we help them make their case for why they would qualify for asylum under United States immigration law. So one thing so today we're going to talk quite a bit about the law that is involved with asylum and or among other things. So at the base of what is an asylum seeker is versus somebody who's a refugee, they're very closely related things, and some people often have questions about what the difference is. So to qualify for asylum in the United States, somebody has to also qualify as a refugee. A refugee is somebody who, as it says here, is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin because of their well-founded fear of being persecuted because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. So they can qualify because of any of those 5 things. And the criteria for being an asylum seeker is more, or there's a little more to it than that under U.S. law. Refugee is a term under international law. So for U.S. immigration law, a refugee is somebody who is applying to come to the country for the reasons stated here from outside the United States. So if they're outside the United States and trying to come here for these reasons, they would fall under refugee law. And if they're already in the United States and claiming that they are a refugee who would like to stay here, then they're an asylum seeker. So asylum seekers are refugees as well, but the legal distinction, if you hear those two, is that asylum seekers are already in the United States, refugees are not.
So I thought it might be interesting to get a bit of an understanding of the numbers of people that we're talking about worldwide. So we have the number here, 89.3 million people are displaced worldwide. So this means like having to leave their country or being forcibly displaced within their own country. This is from all different countries around the world. But then on top of that, some people aren't necessarily displaced outside of their country, like they have to leave their country, but maybe where they're living is extremely unsafe and they need to move to a place that might be more safe for them. And so that's what the 53.2 million number is referring to. Then, as Sam explained, there's these displaced people that are leaving their home and moving somewhere where they're trying to seek safety and seek refuge. But only 21.7 million of those are registered refugees, which again has to meet this international standard, or international, they have to call them refugees. So you have a lot of people who are displaced either within their country or outside of their country that don't have that title of refugee. And if those people enter the U.S., those would be what we would call asylum seekers. And then we have 4.6 million seeking asylum. So as I explained already, those are people who don't meet or who were not granted the title of refugee from the get-go. To give you a breakdown of 69%, these are just refugees specifically. Refugees specifically. 69% of them let me rephrase this. These 5 countries make up 69% of all of the refugees that are currently displaced. 38.4 from Syria, 26% from Venezuela, 15.3 from Afghanistan, 13.6 from South Sudan, and 6.8 from Myanmar. And the other crazy thing that was new to me when I started this work and began to learn a lot more is that I think sometimes we think that the United States, when we hear something happening on the world stage and we hear that people are fleeing their country and there's a bunch of refugees leaving, we kind of assume that they're all coming to the US. That's actually not the case. There's 38% of all the refugees are hosted in these 5 countries. So when you hear something happening on the world stage, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're coming to the US right away. So Turkey is actually the one housing the most right now at 3.8 million. Colombia at 1.8, Uganda, Pakistan, and Germany going forward. Do you want to explain this?
If I could just say that, going back here, so the people or if you see where most refugees are coming from, a lot of them are coming from places like Syria, where there's been civil war going on for over a decade, Venezuela, where there's just abject poverty across the country because of the way that the government has handled the economy, and they've just out of control inflation, and so people who had jobs before either those jobs collapse, or I mean, those jobs just, the businesses fold, and they're forced to try to find some other work, but for so many people, there just is not work available. So they're just reliant on whatever the government is able to give them. Afghanistan, where there's been war for 20 years. South Sudan, there's been a war there almost since since the country was created. Myanmar with the ethnic, the religious, the religious persecution that's happened there, and so all these these places tend to be in the Afro-Eurasian section of the world. So as they flee those places, they're going to whatever's the closest safe place. Generally, they're just getting out of there as quick as they can. So there's a close correlation between Turkey being the closest link to the Middle East, and from Syria, that most of those refugees, those 3.8 million, are from Syria. In Colombia, those are the vast majority of those 1.8 million are from Venezuela, some from Ecuador, and possibly other places, but almost all those are from Venezuela. Uganda, I think that represents both South Sudan as well as some that from the ethnic cleansing that happened in Rwanda some time ago, and from possibly Somalia, I'm not sure exactly, and Pakistan, almost all those are Afghans or people from Iran. And Germany is just, in Europe, Germany has a policy that they basically don't turn anybody away, which has caused some problems politically, but it has been very good for a lot of refugees and people who have been in trouble in their own countries and just have no place to go. And I just find it interesting to know to get an idea of how how geopolitics factors into where the refugees are coming from and where they're going to. So, for our work at Lighthouse, we work with asylum seekers who are applying for asylum both affirmatively, or either affirmatively or defensively. And I just want to explain real quick what the difference is between those. Okay, so basically, defensive asylum, or for defensive asylum, those are for people who are in court proceedings, who have already been taken to court by the government saying that you're not allowed to be here, or you have no authorization to be here, you have no lawful status, and so you need to come to court and explain why we should not remove you from the country. And for people who are applying affirmatively, they are not in court proceedings. That's the basic difference. And we'll go through the process here. So the affirmative process for asylum is that somebody enters the country. As soon as they enter the country, our law says that they are allowed to, if they express a fear of returning to their country because of persecution that they would encounter because of one of those 5 protected reasons: the race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, which is kind of a catch-all category. Our law says then that we are required to allow them a hearing and allow them to explain themselves, and then a judge will decide whether or not they are able to stay here. So the process for them looks like entry into the country. This can be at any port of entry. So a port of entry is anywhere that somebody who's not in the United States can get into the United States. So this can be any of the cities along the southern or the southwest border of the United States. This could be any city that is on the coastline, and this can also be any airport. So Grand Rapids is a port of entry. The Gerald R. Ford International Airport is a port of entry. And also along the Great Lakes are ports of entry as well. So they enter the country, and then they can either tell somebody there at the border or at the port of entry that they fear returning to their country. Actually, another way that somebody can apply for asylum affirmatively, in other words, when they are not in court, is when they are here for another reason. If they have a visa for, say, employment, or for just tourism, or for education, or going to college, or something like that here. And then while they're here, they realize that the situation in their country is such that they fear returning, or maybe they came here knowing that they feared returning and they were just able to get out. And that's the another situation where they can apply for asylum affirmatively, or if they come here and something in their country changes such that they or that they fear returning, such as a new government coming into power, and like in Afghanistan, for instance, in 2021, and when the Taliban came into power, if there were people from Afghanistan that were here, that were maybe going to college or something, a lot of them would apply for asylum once the Taliban took over, because seeing that they've been here, they're almost certainly going to fear returning, and for any number of reasons. If they're here, their political opinion is generally what people from Afghanistan have going for them as far as qualifying for asylum. So, enter into the country, and then you'll find an attorney and file an I-589. An I-589 is the form, or just the asylum application. That's just the name of the form. They don't have to find an attorney. Some of them do file their I-589s on their own. It's a complicated form, and proving the case is or can be complicated, and can involve gathering some documents that the applicant might not realize they need. So an attorney is very helpful in this process. So then they will be scheduled for an interview with USCIS, that's the United States Customs and Immigration Service, and there's 11 asylum offices throughout the country. Each of them has control over a certain jurisdiction. For Holland and for all of Michigan, all of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, all the northern states going all the way over to Idaho, Chicago is where the asylum office is for this jurisdiction. So when we apply for people for asylum, we're then taking them down to Chicago and interviewing, and then they're being interviewed by an asylum officer there. And the asylum officer is not a judge, and they aren't opposed to the asylum necessarily, like somebody from ICE might be, or like if they were in defensive proceedings in court, then there's a prosecutor from ICE there, and who is actively trying to prove why the person does not qualify for asylum. And that's not the case in Chicago. It's much more low-key and non-confrontational. So after that, then they'll be issued a decision, sometimes a few months later, sometimes it could be up to a year or two later. The time frames for all these things just get stretched out depending on what resources the government has available at any given time. And once that decision is made, the decision can be either that the applicant's application is denied or granted. If it's granted, then they have permanent status in the United States and they can stay here forever. They can then apply for a green card to get their legal permanent resident status after 1 year. And then after they've been a green card holder for 5 years, then they can apply for citizenship. So the path from application to hopefully eventual citizenship can be it's at least 6 years, but often quite a bit longer, given that there's a lot of wait times built into the process. Not by design, but one could argue about that. Okay, so the defensive process, I think I clicked out of something. So the defensive process, they enter the United States, and this is often at the southwest border. Most of the clients that we have that are in defensive proceedings, they entered at the southwest border, somewhere in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California. And they're almost invariably placed into detention immediately, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few months, just depends on how full the prisons are. And yeah, they will keep them there basically as long as they can in most cases, unless they have small children, in which case they often will let them out sooner. And then after that, they will process them and give them a notice to appear in immigration court. And that's the document that starts the defensive process and starts their removal proceedings. Once they've done that, and usually they won't have a hearing in court for, right now what we're seeing is about a year after they enter on average. And the first hearing they'll have is a master calendar hearing. It's like setting times, or like setting a timeline and allowing them to plead, which is to say whether they agree with what the notice to appear says and whether they acknowledge that they don't have a visa and that their only way to hopefully stay in the country is through the asylum process. If they don't have an attorney at that point, they will generally find one, and then we will help. So if it's us, then we will help them file their asylum application, again, the I-589. And then there will be an individual hearing, and that is essentially like a trial. It doesn't take as long as most trials. They usually schedule it for about 4 hours. And at that hearing, the asylum applicant will have witnesses come and talk about any persecution they may have faced in the past, and about any about the state of the country that they fear returning to. And of course, the judge will also, or the judge and the ICE prosecutor will ask them questions about we'll ask the applicant themselves a lot of questions and see or try to evaluate whether they think they're telling the truth and whether what they're saying is consistent with what's in their application. They'll go over all the documents, and after that hearing, the judge will issue a decision. And I should mention that in the affirmative process, if they are denied, then they basically will get a note. They're referred to immigration court. In other words, they will then receive in the mail a notice to appear, and then they will be in the same boat as somebody who just came in without a visa. Oh yeah, and so from the time that somebody enters the United States, they have 1 year to apply for asylum, and barring like some exceptional circumstances, like if they were a baby when they entered or something like that, and they couldn't reasonably be expected to have applied during that period of time. But everybody has 1 year. So when we have clients come in or when we have clients call, the first thing we ask them if they're a potential asylum clients is when they enter the United States, because that is the biggest factor in whether we'll be able to help them, or it's the first thing that could screen them out. And so that's always a big thing for us. If they have status, they don't have to apply, or if they have a lawful status like a visa, or if they were paroled in like so many Afghans have been, then they don't have to apply until their status runs out. Okay.
So you heard a lot about all of the understanding what these people might be going through and the legal background of it. And now we want to talk about what services our office offers. So Sam and I are the asylum team, excuse me, at the office. We have 2 other attorneys who also offer other types of family reunification, so family petitions for people that are U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. We offer assistance for applying for work authorization, paths to citizenship, VAWA, U visa, and T visa. VAWA is Violence Against Women Act. U visa is for someone who has been a victim of a violent crime, and T visa is for someone who was trafficked into the country. TPS stands for Temporary Protective Status. That's also something that we can help clients apply for. But to speak a little bit more about what our asylum process looks like, or how we can assist clients with that. So say you know someone that might need our services, that client would call our office and speak with Angel, our administrative assistant, who would then schedule what we call a phone triage. This is just a brief conversation of like a half hour to understand a little bit about their date of entry, where they arrived, where they're coming from, maybe a little bit about why they're fleeing their country, do they have family here, do they have kids, all that kind of stuff. That helps us know who needs to be seen right away, because maybe someone entered, today's mid-January, maybe someone entered February 2022, and we have about 3 weeks to file their asylum application. We don't want to accidentally wait until April, and then they are no longer eligible to apply. Or it'd be more difficult to make an argument for like a good reason for the delay. So then they come into our office for a consultation, which is where we meet with them for an hour or 2 to learn more about their immigration history, how they came here, to better understand like their case for asylum, what persecution they experienced, or what fear of future persecution that they have. That consultation is really, at that consultation, they're not already our client. That's for us to understand the best path for us to help them. For example, some Cubans may have a strong asylum claim, but there's also other remedies for Cubans, this thing called the Cuban Adjustment Act. So maybe we need to talk with them to figure out which is the best path for them. After we agree that there's a strong asylum claim and that we're going to represent them as a client, they come back and are retained in our office. And then myself and Sam work with them to complete that I-589, that complicated form, to then submit it to the government. We also help with family reunification, so meaning for refugees and asylees. So asylee is someone who's already received asylum status versus an asylum seeker. So there's a form that now soon we're going to get to do for Afghans to help bring their immediate family members. It's just spouses and kids under 21. Yeah. So unmarried kids under 21. So that's also something that, everyone's asking, when can my family get here? I fled here in July, but my child, my 10-year-old child is still there with her mom. How do they get here? And so, of course, that's always an immediate question and something we want to address as soon as possible. Do you have anything to add?
I just want to say, so as soon as somebody is granted asylum, their family members, their a spouse and unmarried kids under 21 are immediately eligible to join them. So it doesn't mean that the form will immediately be processed because it's the government, but they are immediately able to join them or to have an application filed for them. Something that's exciting that just happened on Friday is something family reunification related, in that the government has announced and put out a new form for Afghan families to be reunited before they have asylum. So everybody here who's been paroled in, like there's 70, 80,000 people, and many of whom are currently applying for asylum or just waiting for decisions. Almost all of our Afghan clients are just waiting for decisions. Some of them have been for almost half a year now. And but for those folks who were not able to get their wives or kids over here, we can now submit a form for them that or to hopefully get them evacuated as soon as possible, so they no longer have to live in. So many of them are just living in hiding there, and so many of these folks for us are wives and kids. There were plane loads of just soldiers that were evacuated pretty much straight from bases. Their commanders said, "Get to the airport, you all need to leave right now." And so they all came over, and then all their families are still there, and their wives are not allowed to work under the Taliban, and they often have several children. So these men who are here are working and able to send some money back there, hopefully, but they are just the families there are just in most cases just confined to their houses and really don't have much of a life. So we are very excited that we will soon be able to help apply to hopefully get some of those folks out of there sooner than we otherwise would, given that these asylum applications are still pending. So.
Okay, we're going to move on now to talking about when Sam and I went to the border at El Paso, Ciudad Juarez. I believe some people spoke to you a little bit about this already, so you might hear a little bit of the same information, but everyone's experience is different. Everyone has a different perspective, so thank you for letting us share ours. So one aspect that was interesting to me was that I had never walked across a border before. Whenever I've gone to Mexico or gone to Argentina, I flew there. And so this was a different experience for me, literally walking across a bridge that went over the wall that you can see here, and walking into Mexico. And when we walked into Mexico, there was no checking IDs. Really the only thing they were really concerned about is that we weren't bringing any weapons into the country. There were so many signs, I was like, I don't have a weapon in my bag, right? Obviously I didn't, but that was the main thing they were concerned about. There was no checking of IDs, there was no why are you here, you just put your bag through a little conveyor and you're in Mexico. Coming back was a little bit different. We still walked across. I wish, you can see here on the picture all the way on the left, that's kind of like the pathway that we were walking through, and to the left there was like 4 or 5 lanes of traffic all the way backed up, and these are the cars that are driving into Mexico and driving into the US. So we walked. It's actually faster to walk because you don't get stuck in the really long line of traffic. For us, when we walked back, for me, I'm a US citizen, I have a US passport, and so I just gave them my passport, they scanned it and said, are you bringing anything back? And I said, a couple souvenirs, put my bag in the conveyor, and I was in the US. Obviously, this is not the case for many of my clients that I work with, and that was like a stark comparison. We watched some cars that came through, pulled off and had to go through this. Oh, I wish I did put the picture in here. There was this like ginormous metal detector, although I'm sure it's not just detecting metal, but that a car drives through and they scan the whole thing. So that was a fascinating thing to me, walking into Mexico, how easy that was and how easy it was for me to walk into the US, but how different that was as well. Anything to add before I go? Okay. Another aspect that was impactful to me was we spent a lot of time visiting shelters in Juarez where asylum seekers that fled their countries in mostly Central and South America were the people that we met. had come to the border but were either not allowed to cross or had crossed and then been immediately sent back. So there were these thousands of people in waiting, which we'll talk a little bit about why in a second. But there's all these people that were in waiting that needed somewhere to go. They obviously couldn't go back because they left for a reason. So they're just waiting in Juarez. And so there was all these people and some amazing people from Frontera de Gracia and other churches in the area in Juarez open these shelters, open up their sanctuaries to house people, which I thought was the most beautiful thing of what a sanctuary should be for. In Frontera de Gracia, they had not pews that are like in the floor, but just like chairs. And so at night they take all the chairs down and that's where all the beds go for people. And I was like, what a beautiful representation of what the church and what the sanctuary is for. These are two pictures. This is actually two different shelters that we went to. And then the top left one is another shelter where you can see where families would stay, or where individuals would stay. This shelter kind of separated people based on single men, single women, families, and women with children. There were very few men that came with children without a wife or a mother, but that's how they would try to organize them so everyone would have privacy and feel safe in their space. Two more things about shelters. One of them, on the first slide, I talked about open and closed shelters. As you may know, there's a consistent theme of how vulnerable these populations are as they're traveling to the United States. And there are some people who take advantage of this group of people. So closed shelters are shelters that once you enter into the shelter, and maybe you even have to pay to stay there, you're pretty much not allowed to leave. You can't leave to go to work. You can't even leave if you have to go to the hospital. You can't leave to go for a walk in the park, go to see a movie, go to the grocery store, all that kind of freedom. You're pretty much stuck there. And maybe they use the word migrants to describe this population in Mexico. Maybe some migrants don't know that that's not your only option. But there's a lot of those there where people are taking advantage of the vulnerability of this population. Open shelters like Frontera de Gracia and the ones that we visited, these are ones where there's often childcare offered. They try to get kids connected into school because some people might be waiting here for 6 months, 9 months, a year, who knows. People go find work in Juarez. They organize, let's all go to the park and let our kids play on the swing set, or let's all go to the mall and walk around. We walked around like 3 different malls while we were there. It was actually interesting to learn, but then they can go do that too. And then they also will help you find a doctor if needed. The other new shelter, the bottom right one, this is part of the background, is one of the new shelters that Frontera de Gracia opened. When we were there, they were opening soon. I would think that they might be open now. I'm not actually sure. But one of the really unique things about this one is that they're trying to make it more self-sustainable, meaning that they're trying to figure out how to feed all of these people. So the money that's maybe donated down there is helping to, put a roof on the place and help to pay for plumbing and all that stuff. But how are you going to feed all of these people? And this shelter has these ginormous pigs that they're raising there. They have a fish farm. These huge tanks have water in them with tilapia, and then the discarded water, as they're filtering it through, goes down and goes into a greenhouse to have vegetables and fruit growing there. And that was a really innovative way, I thought, to help support these people. Do you have anything to add about the shelters before we go? Okay. How are we doing on time? Does anyone know? What time is it? Oh boy, okay. All right, this is the biggest topic. So, obviously, the wall. We went out to one of the outskirts of Juarez, not right downtown, and went up to the wall and touched it. As you can see, there's a lot of garbage discarded here of people. This is where people climb over the wall and go into the desert to try to seek asylum if they can't, because also when we were there, they weren't really letting anyone pass at the port of entry without like a visa or something. This next picture is probably the most haunting picture that I took while I was there, the one on the left. You can see at the top, there's those scrapes are from people's shoes from climbing over. So there was no one there trying to cross while we were there, but it was just evidence of people's desperation to come into the U.S. or to flee wherever they're coming from. Anything to add? Okay. There was also this huge Venezuelan camp right next to the border. Now, if you may have seen, this is completely empty. There are all that's there are armed, I don't know if they're local police or army, I don't know exactly, but this is completely cleared out. They kicked them all out of this space, won't let them stay there anymore. But while we were there, a ton of Venezuelans who have fled. One individual walked into the camp and took this picture. You can also get a sense from here. That's the Rio Grande. That's just how close they are to the border, but just on the Juarez side. We're running out of time, so I don't know which part is most important. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the parole thing, or do you want to talk about this?
Well, we should just go back, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
So regarding the reason so many people are there is because of this Title 42, where people are just being turned back without being allowed to seek asylum, which is arguably in contravention of, or is against the U.S. law, and so. But it's only for a limited number of people. The people that can be turned back and are being turned back are specific to certain countries. It had been for a long time just Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and so everybody else was basically able to come in. There was a brief period of time where people for about a month earlier last year that Cubans were being turned back, and then and also anybody from a country where we have an agreement with that country that the people can just be flown back. So like with Ukraine, because they're a member of NATO, if Ukrainians were showing up at the southern border, there was a period of time anyway where they were just basically immediately being put on flights and sent back to Ukraine, regardless of how many hundreds of miles sometimes they had traveled, on foot or by car or bus to get to the Mexican border. And now, just recently, as you may be aware, the Biden administration had tried to rescind the policy and were blocked by doing so. And then a judge had struck it down and said that from the start, this has been was not put into place with the right procedure. And they had struck it down. It was going to expire in late December. Then the Supreme Court said, there was a further challenge to that, or an appeal to that judge's order, and the Supreme Court has kept it in place. And now the Biden administration has negotiated with Mexico to allow, and Mexico has agreed to expand the policy to Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua as well, and Haiti, or did I say Haiti? And Cuba is the other one they added. Those were not. Mexico would not accept people from those countries before, but now they are. So that policy will be in place for the foreseeable future. But also interesting to me is that Mexico has actually agreed to continue accepting people from those four countries: Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, even after Title 42 is done. So this is not something that will be stopped. I think the Biden administration, even if Title 42 is eventually struck down, I think they have a plan in mind to continue just like the closing of the border to people from so many of these countries where they have been persecuted or fear persecution.
Obviously, with all the complexities and all the language difficulties and the government interventions and delays and whatnot, there may be questions that you have. And I think both Sam and Grace have given us that side, at least a taste of it. And Grace has given us an opportunity to kind of experience what it must be like to be there as a person. So we appreciate that. Now, Jeff has question, microphone opportunities, and Mark has on the other side. So would you please ask questions if you have them? If not, we'll turn it back to Sam and Grace and let them continue.
I'll start before I hand the microphone to anybody else and ask a question. Just could you comment, it strikes me from what I just saw, that if you are an asylum seeker and you manage to get yourself to Turkey, you can go to a refugee camp, and if you manage to get yourself to the United States, you're put in prison. So could you comment on that and help us understand what's going on with that?
So we actually have or in the United States, in some ways, we have a more humane system than in other, or in countries like Turkey, in that the conditions in which people are kept in often tend to be better. That is until this the Title 42 thing really started, and then before that, the Trump administration had put into place these what they called the migrant protection protocols, otherwise known in like the media here as the Remain in Mexico policy, where they would allow people, as they were required to by law, they would allow people to claim asylum, and then instead of allowing them to wait here, they would turn them back to Mexico and say you have to wait in Mexico. And so there were just people collecting in Mexico that were waiting for their court dates in the United States. And the United Nations and the Red Cross offered to set up refugee camps like there are in Turkey or in Greece or in Italy or any country where people are displaced. There are humanitarian organizations that are experienced with setting up at least a place for them to live with some measure of dignity, even if it is, in a tent. And it's not great, but at least it's a safe place for them to wait their day in court or wait the government processing their claim. The United States and the Trump administration refused to accept that help. They didn't. It basically would look bad to have a refugee camp on the southern border. So we just sent them back, and just with no help or no instruction, no safe place for them to stay, and so they've been subject to there've been gangs, cartels, that kind of thing, and just like opportunists who know these people are there with nobody and nothing, and have just taken advantage of them. And the crime is just rampant along the southern border against these people who just don't have any support system. So it is really, it's not great. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily address the question about detention, but there's the private prison system that is a big part of that, and we just have contracts with all these private prisons, and so it is in the United States government's best interest to keep those prisons full. So there's that.
I'd like to thank you on the part of the whole team working for the Muries. I cannot imagine all that you've taken, all the steps you've taken, plus prayers from us and on your part. I wanted to just give another couple of examples. Wondered why the cousin of Ahmadze wanted to keep going to Germany. Now I know why. So he chose to stay because he was just about to be kicked out of the refugee center in Sofia when we were able to get help. So the cousin made it to Germany. He is still in asylum there, and every few weeks he gets shipped to another asylum center in Germany, which sounds horrible. But anyway, I want to thank you. When I was with the mother of the family recently at a doctor's office, an interpreter was there, and I said, what you're doing is very important. And I learned that he had been separated. He'd married a month before being forced out of the country, and he's not been able to do anything about it, and I recommended you.
Robin, before you sit down, would you just briefly take a moment to explain how you entered into the story of getting Ahmadze back home?
Well, the funny part of it is I'm a member now of St. Francis, and St. Francis was getting ready to help with refugee families, but they weren't doing it very fast. So I said, I'll put in my lot with Third Reformed Church. And it's been a great adventure. Thank you.
But you actually helped in some way getting the lawyer in Bulgaria to work on the process from that end.
Well, what happened, the weird thing is I'm thinking there must be churches that could help. And I tried to contact churches in Sofia because they need a safe place for Ahmadze. And then I thought, well, the Reformed Church has some international office. So I'll contact the international office. And who answers the phone but?
Phil Tanis.
Thank you. That was, I've never contacted them before, had no idea he was there, but that's how God has worked.
There are a lot of people to shout out and recognize for all the pieces that are falling in place, and we started with Roger. We can't overlook Laura and Carter. You're doing a fabulous job on behalf of the congregation and so many others. Robin was a piece of that. So Third Church is making a difference in the world. I don't want to take any more time from our speakers. Other questions? If not, we can give you a couple minutes to wrap it up.
So there's one other thing that we wanted to address. There's a new policy in place that was announced at the same time that they expanded the Title 42 to apply to Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. There's a new parole program is what it's called, and basically it's a sponsorship program where people in the United States can sponsor or can basically sponsor people to come to the United States from these countries who are in need. And I just wanted to give you just a very brief summary of what that looks like, and what it is, or who is eligible to sponsor and who is eligible to qualify as a beneficiary of this policy. So people who are allowed to support somebody coming here are people who are an individual who has lawful status in the United States, or is a parolee. In other words, like if somebody from, or there are other situations where parole applies other than from Afghanistan. We see that all the time, so I kind of default to that. But for people who have been paroled into the country, they can petition to get their family members in. So U.S. citizens and nationals are able to do this, and lawful permanent residents. And people who are able, and also they will accept sponsors, or they will accept, like a company can sponsor, or a group of people can sponsor, or a church can sponsor. So just wanted to make that clear as well. And so the people who this could apply to are people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, or they're an immediate family member of one of theirs who is of any nationality, such as somebody who is from Venezuela, has been staying in Colombia, and had a child while there. And they have to be outside the United States to be considered for the parole. That's another big thing. And they have to have a passport. And there are several other requirements that need to be met, but it is quite broad compared to anything that's ever existed for these folks before. And there are lots of opportunities for people who have the means to really take people out of dangerous situations and give them, for at least a year or two, the benefits that that the U.S. government is just denying everybody right now, or denying anybody who just shows up on their own right now. And and this was just announced either within the past couple weeks, so wanted to make that clear.
Well, we'd like to thank the people who've been with us on Zoom, and I did not hear any request for a question coming from the booth, so we will consider that area listening. Please take home your handout and sort out some of these things that have been so difficult to absorb in such a short time. But we thank our speakers very much. And I couldn't help but think, as I walked out this morning and checked my mailbox, there was a magazine with, on the cover, new rules for asylum seekers. How could we have done any better to plan having you here, having you gone to the border with our team, having people here who are interested in learning more about it, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for being here.
Excuse me.
Thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I have a minute or two to stay after if anyone wants to ask me questions, and I also brought all my business cards, which as a new grad feels really cool to have my first business card. So if anyone wants one or knows someone who might need to get in contact with our office, please ask. I have plenty.
We do have one question which just came in late from the Zoom. The question is, how much hope for success can you offer a new client with an affirmative asylum petition? And what percentage overall have a successful result?
That's a question for our attorney, Sam.
So it varies very widely depending on the specific situation. So far, we're seeing a lot of success for people from Afghanistan, and there are people like Christians in China, for instance, very high rates of acceptance. For most people from Venezuela, for instance, right now, there are very, very low rates of acceptance of those asylum applications because so many people are just fleeing poverty, and that is not what asylum is designed for. It's understandable why somebody would be doing so and why they would want to come here. And right now, because the asylum system of the United States government is underfunded and is basically just broken in that it takes forever, which it shouldn't. Because of that, they do often have a year or two where they can actually work and actually have some money to support their family. So, it's hard to blame them for that. But overall, people who are represented by an attorney when they are making their asylum case, whether it's affirmative or defensive, have a much higher rate of acceptance than people who do not, or who do not have an attorney. But other than that, it really does depend very much on the individual situation of the applicant. We do. She asked if we accept, or if we take donations, and Lighthouse does take donations. It is a nonprofit organization, so it's funded in large part by donations and by and some grants that we've received. But yeah.
Something I would add, thank you for bringing that up, is that so we have a program called the Victim Advocacy Program that asylum falls under, as well as the VAWA, U-Visa, those that I mentioned earlier. Typically, when someone comes to our office, it's a $40 consultation fee. There might be a fee with our office as well as government fees to actually file the form. When someone comes to our office that's going to have an asylum case with us, they do not pay a dime to our office. And the way we are able to do that is through donations, to be able to offer those services so that way they don't have to pay that. We strongly believe that they've experienced enough that they don't need to have to worry about paying for quality representation. So thank you for asking that question.
And with that, go in peace.